No, I was going to say I won't keep you too long today, but I did want to say that I really enjoyed the movie, and I loved speaking to Tamara and Oona last week. They're just so committed to what they do, and they're incredible in the film. I mean, blimey, at their age, it's quite impressive.
I know it's all about casting. It's always about getting the casting right, and then your job is much easier. So, and I mean, the thing that is they just loved each other, and so I mean, the whole cast just had the best time, and that's a wonderful environment. I mean, and I would every so often have to say, please don't make me be mom. Please don't make me come and be the police and say, we actually have work to do. Please don't make me be that person. And then every so often I'd have to come on set and say, hey, this day is really hard. Could you just cut, because they were dancing and singing. I mean, you could barely say cut and they would be like in their next TikTok.
But what was it initially that attracted you to this story, to getting involved in this project?
I love it's always for me about girl power. It's always about female empowerment. And I really like and I also love doing special effects, obviously. And I love the idea. So I love, okay, I get to do my own monsters. Great. But I also loved the fact that Liz's character that everybody wasn't a Disney character, that they were complicated, that I was allowed to make Liz unhappy and unpleasant to start with, so that you knew that something complicated was going on, and that they had to work toward and against each other so that they both learned from each other, which sounds very Disney.
But because you mentioned about kind of like you like the idea of like being able to have your own kind of monsters, because obviously, I mean, if you look across your career, you've stepped in and done fantastic episodes of so many great TV series. But I guess when you walk into a TV series, the look, the feel, the aesthetic has all been kind of set for you. And I just wondered about being in something from its kind of genesis right through to the end. Was that quite a nice thing to have that kind of, to see it from beginning to end without knowing you were kind of passing the baton on to another director afterwards?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That's the joy of making movies. But I also want to say that in Doctor Who, you're given this incredible freedom to make every episode is its own movie. And so although you're sometimes using monsters that exist, you're still doing things with them that it's different and expanding. And so Doctor Who is a real exercise is a real filmmaker's show. But to get to start everything from scratch, that's the joy of movie making. So your world, there's a book, the book is not really filmable. And then how do you expand that to the next and really create worlds that are filmable and filmic? I early on said to Joe Ballarini, who wrote the book and wrote the screenplay, I don't think we can have the Grand Guignol live in a dark cave. I would like him to live in a palace and be aspirational and rock and roll. And Joe was like, great, let's do it. But he'd initially created the Grand Guignol to be based on the underground tunnels he'd seen in Vietnam. And I said, and having shot in underground tunnels and having shot in caves and having shot, okay, and then we're in a dark space that's really hard to light and not visual. And I love making, I think I really aim toward making things that are very beautiful. So I wanted the Grand Guignol's lair to be scary but beautiful.
Because I think also, because I always think when people say, oh, you need to make a movie that appeals to parents and children alike, I actually think there's three categories. I think you've got children, then you've got like teenagers, and then you've got parents. It's almost like three separate. And I think this struck me as a movie that feels like it could really play to young children, to teenagers, and to parents. I just wondered about striking that balance and making something that is accessible to pretty much anyone of any age.
I think if you are really into horror, then it doesn't work for you. If you're just the hardcore horror, the Nightmare on Elm Street fan, then it doesn't work for you, because it is. So what you're trying to go for is that universal feel, and the master of that was my producer, Ivan Reitman. Ghostbusters is the perfect example of that. Although Ghostbusters is almost more comedic than we were. But trying to walk that balance of, because I do scary quite easily, having come from more scary. So actually bringing back, and and I can do doing the comedy to break out of it, I do as well. But making the scary stuff not too scary was hard, because I immediately go to this place where I know how to get into your psyche and frighten you, from starting at Nightmare on Elm Street to doing Doctor Who. And then you end up saying, well, but now I have to skew much younger. So how do I still scare you, but not, and I talked to a lot of parents who said, yeah, my child was scared afterwards, but by bedtime they were okay. So that's sort of the right balance. Is it was scary enough, and fun enough.
Yeah. Do you remember? Did you ever have like any? Not to sort of drag up sort of really sort of bad old memories, but do you remember having any kind of recurring nightmares when you were a kid, or any sort of monsters or anything that used to keep you up at night?
I was always. I mean, first of all, I was scared of everything in real life, so I didn't need nightmares. I mean, I was a very, very frightened child. But I would have that sort of I'm running and I can't get anywhere nightmare more than anything. It wasn't monster oriented. I had plane crash nightmares, but I had that classic running and you're not moving, running and you're not moving, and it's catching up to you, it's catching up to you. And it didn't matter what it was. It was more the feeling of not being able to breathe and choking and how can this be happening? I still have that. And then the recurring nightmare that I still have, which is ludicrous, is that I'm taking a test and I turn it over and I don't know anything. And I didn't study and I'm in the wrong class. And how can I'd only studied it? I mean, even now, I still have that nightmare. If I just worked harder, thank you, parents. Thank you, mom and dad. If I just worked harder, how could I not know any of this? What happened?
My mum and dad took me to the London dungeons when I was a kid, and
yeah.
there was a Jack the Ripper experience, which was one of like a walkthrough experience, and that it was so my nightmares as a kid were very Jack the Ripper orientated. So it was a monster, but a real life monster. Yeah.
Which is, I mean, a very good valid one. Did you see The Ruling Class with?
No, I've not seen that. No.
So, well, it'll bring back your Jack the Ripper. I mean, it's a wonderful movie and I saw it in my early teens, and Peter O'Toole goes from this happy hippie, and then they give him, they don't like him being the happy hippie. And so they give him electric shock. I think it's electric shock. They give him some kind of therapy where they normalize him, but he turns into Jack the Ripper. So it's a great metaphor for all those things. And we shouldn't take the happiness out of anybody.
Yeah.
We shouldn't remove anybody's happiness. It's hard enough.
Yeah. But talking of your monster, obviously Tom Felton does a fantastic job. It almost veers on kind of pantomime villain at times, but he is actually genuinely scary at times. You must have been thrilled to get him on board, because he is an actor obviously so many people know from Harry Potter, but he showed in this his range and his kind of ability to really wear any hat that's given to him.
So I called Tom. I had worked with Tom I produced The Borrowers with him when he was 8 years old.
Oh, wow.
And I had worked with him again on The Flash. So I called him and I said, hey, will you take a look at this? I think we can do something really wonderful with it. And he said, well, how much range do I have and how much flexibility? And I had brought the musical element into it. And I knew that Tom was musical and loved music. And then he was fully embraced that. And it's really hard. I mean, he is like the best of British actors. He brings so much and then wants to play with it. So we had lighter versions, we had darker versions, and that's great. In the editing room, you're trying to balance that. I mean, when you have that unbelievable amount of talent that you can just bring all these different tones. Peter Capaldi does that in Who, not to bring up Who all the time, but
no, please, it's great.
Bringing all those and then shaping it and coming back and saying, should I try it darker? Should I try it lighter? And we tried darkening his voice more. We tried the sort of electronic, really scary voice, and it took all the joy out of him. And so it was fun. Again, that impossible balance that I don't know if I hit or not of keeping that lightness, which is that sort of archness of a villain with genuine scary moments, but not enough to be to lose half our audience. We had in our first test screening, the opening they said which was longer, the audience definitely said was way too scary.
Because I was wondering about sort of mentioning that obviously that before when we started the interview, you said obviously at times you almost had to play mum because obviously you had a sort of set of younger actors. But is there something quite nice that sort of does it remind you of kind of why we all love this industry when you're dealing with kind of a young crowd on set? 'Cause I guess for them it's not really work. It's they've got this kind of blissful outlook and it must be so enjoyable. Is that quite an infectious kind of energy that sort of extends amongst the whole cast and crew?
Completely. And they were very professional though. I mean, they were having a great time, but the second you said, okay, time to work, they were all prepared. They were very professional. But the second, like when we had the ball pit and it was 66,000 balls in that ball pit, when we had the ball pit, the second I yelled cut, they all went and jumped into it. And then, and then you had to pull them back out and set up the next take. But that was so fun. I mean, there's a lot of joy in watching them having such a good time. And they were all good about going to school. I mean, and that's the hard part is like, okay, you have this excitement on set, you have all these things you have to do, you have this action, you have this, and then you end up then in the middle of the day, okay, cut, now go to school. Learn 20 minutes of math, come back. So I don't know how you compartmentalize all those things. A lot of really good parents with these really amazing kids.
And you mentioned just before about obviously doing like test screenings and then having to alter sort of stuff in the tone afterwards. What is that? How is that across like your career? Because you've been in your experienced kind of director. You've been here before, and I just wondered about the feeling of when you do play it to an audience and you do get that feedback and then that process that then means right, we've got to change stuff, but you don't want to change too much and play too much into their hands. I just wondered about how it feels as a director when you do get feedback that requires slight alterations.
Well, first of all, it's terrifying the first time you show it to the audience. So the second you get your first laugh or your first gasp or whatever, everything, it's like, yes, it's playing. Because no matter what, you're still like, oh, what if it just doesn't work? No matter how much you have faith in your work. But I think it's very much about having faith in your work. So, and not paying attention to everybody's little opinions because everybody has a different opinion. Is there a consistent set of questions that anybody's asking that they really don't understand? That's number one, that you can pay attention to and that you want to solve. If you have one person said, why are there Halloween decorations on every house? And I thought, I mean, you get questions like that. And I thought, well, you haven't been in North America in the areas that I've been in where there are Halloween decorations. These were real houses decorated, except for our main house, which we decorated. But if there's legitimate things, and there was enough kids and parents saying the opening was too scary, so then you say, okay, what is the balance there? And there's no answer. You also have to have faith in yourself in your movie and make decisions that are ones that you personally have the most faith in. And it helps to have some experience to say, okay, well, that's just that doesn't matter, but these things matter in terms of the audience enjoyment or what I really care about, which is occasionally you fight for something that you just believe in, that, because this is just a tiny sampling that has so much power.
Yeah, because obviously, and also when I sort of finished the movie, I did get a feel that it is a world I feel like I could step into again. It's got the kind of look of, because it was something so unique and distinctive about the aesthetic. It felt like, I don't know, I felt like I left a kind of theme park and I'd like to go back one day and do it all again. So have there been talks for that? Is there any kind of discussions? Because obviously I know it feels like characters in a world that could be explored further in the future.
Yeah. So it's a series of books. So the first thing that you can do is go read book 2 and find out what happened to Liz's brother, which is obviously what we've set up for book 2. And book 3 is out as well. So number 1 is to encourage people to go read. And then, yes, there are discussions of where we go next.
Oh, nice. And I was wondering too, I mean, obviously, yeah, we sort of mentioned some of your great kind of credits. I mean, obviously, Doctor Who, Sherlock, things like that. Do you ever find yourself flicking through the TV at home and find something that you directed and just think, go on then, I'll just keep this one on, see what...
No, occasionally I'll find a family member watching something, especially when it's either Tank Girl and turns to be on TV, or Sherlock. Occasionally I'll find that, but no, I'm always like cringe. Plus I have to do events with I have to show Heaven Sent over and over again. So I don't need to watch it again. Coming back to Tank Girl has been interesting for the 25th year, because that's getting a lot of attention. So watching that again, I've had to do with an audience, which has been absolutely fascinating. It's a completely different experience to watch that with an audience 25 years later. But no, I don't really feel like I want to watch. I want to watch everybody else's work, and there's so much amazing work out there.
Yeah, because I was going to ask. I mean, I know obviously you're soon to be on location. So, are you allowed to talk about what you're working on at the moment, or is it a bit hush hush for now?
I'm just doing some television episodes. I'm basically just earning some money right now during COVID, while for the really small things that one's able to work on. So there's a lot of episodes shooting up here in Vancouver, and so I'm fortunate enough to be able to just work, and I have to pay some bills. But the longer term plan is there's a couple of things that I'm developing. That one is girl demon horror series that I can just say that I'm developing a series about girls and demons. And then I'm reading a lot of scripts, and I'd really love to do something political. I always want to do female forward. I really love to do something political, and I'm always looking to see if I can get the big action film, because obviously I like these huge effects fantasy. But the episode I'm doing isn't worth talking about. It's just paying my daughter's college tuition.
Yeah, well, because I mean, how have you found this year? Because I know obviously if you just look at your work and you look at kind of how kind of prolific you are, I guess you must travel so much. Have you taken this time to actually just be at home for a bit and just quite enjoy sometimes sort of seeing family and spending time at home, or have you been kind of itching to get back out there?
I'm always itching to work, but I haven't. I mean, yes, what it did is it allowed me to be every day in post production on Babysitter's Guide. So I haven't really stopped working, because we were. I mean, it was much harder doing post during COVID. There were many fewer of us, and I had to do much more. And so that was really, really full time all the way through from lockdown until a month ago. And but yes, I'm always itching for the next thing. But I was surprised how busy I was, and trying to do all. So we had this one test screening with an audience, and then lockdown happened the next week. And then we were editing, and then we were stuck in the editing room trying to do tests through Netflix, through Zoom, and yeah, I'm like everyone. I miss human contact so much. So it's nice to be back but we're doing everything on Zoom. I mean, we're in an office and we're Zooming with each other in the office. So people, yeah, it's so sad. So I'm really glad that we've been able to put out a Halloween movie, because I think Halloween is so ruined.
Yeah, well, I agree. I'm already getting the occasional invites in to see it, to press screenings and stuff for Christmas movies. I'm like, oh, I just want to feel Christmassy as well when the time comes. I just want anything that reminds me of the old way of life. Anyway,
yes, agree.
Yeah, to let you get back to work. But thank you so much for your time this morning. It's been a real pleasure speaking to you, and fingers crossed, by the time there is a sequel for Babysitter's Guide,
we'll all be having an event.
Yes, we'll be doing
in
person. Yeah, exactly. All right.
All over the world.
Exactly.
It'll be brilliant.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching Hey You Guys.
Hey You Guys, huh?
Hey You Guys.
Is that from the Goonies?
It is indeed, yeah.
Nice.
Hey You Guys.